Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze.
1974 on the Blazing Saddle. Something occurred. Set that the actor is not excusably in the Waco Kid, vanished following what he did 4 years later. One day John Wayne still haunts Hollywood screenplay and uttered 3 phrases that the original title in every way possessed a relationship with Malcolm X that Warner Brothers is laid to rest, and a concealed message in the name of the governor. Thought only historians from France can comprehend. These are not merely movie-related facts. Secrets they attempted to conceal for 50 Sadal's years of burning started with a wild concept. It was first known as Tex XAA, clear acknowledgement of Malcolm X, the driving force in his 20s. Andrew Bergman wished to write a narrative about a black sheriff in a town in the West that is entirely white. That notion was explosive on its own. Designating the Malcolm X's successor as sheriff wasn't merely a jest. He wanted to tear it apart, dismantling the pristine, polished myth of cowboys in Hollywood. An Old West leader who was black that completely upended the genre. What was even more startling was that the script was examined by a major studio. Genuinely in the early 1970s movies didn't address race in that way. Particularly not through comedy at the time. Tex's name was omitted, but that fire remained in the finished blazing before Mel Brooks arrived. Saddles the movie nearly went in. Alan Arkin was directed in a new direction. To oversee and James Earl. The Sheriff Jones did this long before he was appointed that Darth Vader. Jones' voice was strong and depth without any comedic experience. He was still a wise option. But the creative conflicts caused the project to fail. Executives who were anxious and the blunt force. Everyone was afraid of the script because it sat on a shelf because it was too daring. Only after Mel Brooks entered the room did the net sprang to life without any water. He pushed it down, even down without that prior setback. Blazing Mel Saddles wouldn't exist as they do now. Brooks wasn't feeling well at the time of his deposition. He was awarded by the producers Oscar, but it didn't generate any revenue for him. The 12 Chairs, his next movie, was a huge failure. Was so poor that he was unable to purchase a new vehicle, and he and Anne were expecting a child. He was prepared to give up bank and return to TV after receiving a Tax offer. He refused to accept it since he thought that he accepted it for himself since he was Brooks. Later acknowledged this in a frantic manner. Film saved him and enabled him to purchase a home that afforded a good meal, and at last Burning Saddles turned his head and breathed again. The entire experience of drafting the script was Brooks didn't work alone. He was a complete pandemonium. Brought in for other authors. Andrew Norman Steinberg, Richard Pryor, and Bergman. Alan Muir's writing room was similar to everyone shouted and protested throughout the bar. Fight battled to keep their gags alive. Session continued long into the night. Survived off on adrenaline and Chinese takeaway. The initial draft had 412 pages. That is sufficient for about 8 hours of film. They still reduced it to 275 pages, to lengthy but jam-packed with wild humor that broke the rules before bringing his crisp edge to the text. Particularly when the character that no one could even do. You recall who penned the fart scene surrounding the campfire that sprang from this insanity wasn't written but conflict, and the outcome was something Hollywood hadn't before seen anything from the Brooks. But began by setting the mood with a placard on "Please do not write a message on the wall," courteous lettering. That symbol formed, he instructed his troops to chuck everything Gexcolds, everything that wasn't his. It was easy to think, but they probably won't in any case. Let's go crazy, and they did. They make fun of racism, Hollywood cliches, and the audacity to make jokes in topics that no one else would discuss. Previously penned Jewish jokes that black humor were written by writers, but no one stayed. This blend, in a lane, gave the movie its the brave voice. Wasn't merely a joke. Of westerns, it destroyed them and created a Richard, something fresh from the wreckage. Pryor was meant to be the celebrity that he was. Sheriff Bart was Brooks' first choice, but Warner Brothers declined, stating Pryor's recent incarceration and drug problems rendered him uninsurable. Brooks was enraged and considered living, but Pryor seemed unusually composed, advised him not to, and he said, "We'll locate the keep going, proper guy." Pryor died and ceased to exist, even though he joined the writing team and influenced the tone of the movie from Cleveland. Behind the scenes, Little got Brooks, the main character, later said they received it fortunate to have little but unable to assist. The speculating about Pryor's performance have appeared, particularly since he and Gene Wilder rose to fame as a comedian. Pair after only 2 years, and then arrived. Mel Brooks was the biggest surprise of all. Desired the Waco Kid to be played by John Wayne. Yes, the John Wayne that he was still among the world's biggest stars. Wayne read the script that Brooks provided him. He claimed to have laughed his ass overnight, but he declined, stating that it was too filthy for his reputation. He said he would be the first to view it, but only imagine it at its most serious and straightest. The greatest cowboy ever performing an intoxicatruin in a movie that makes fun of his whole agenda. It nearly happened but didn't. When Wayne refused, Brooks became fixated. Don Daly wasn't a good choice for casting. The Westerner was well known for his musicals. However, he was a greater horseman than almost everyone believed that Brooks would be. He even located him in How I Daily adored the screenplay, but changed. His eyes were fading as well. Claimed that he was nearly blind and unable to. Brooks was crushed and could not be securely ridden. He persisted in seeking the ideal performer. But when the worst happened, fate had other ideas. Casting catastrophe. Of all the gigs that Brooks hired, Young was an Oscar winner and possessed the Brooks desired tired appearance. While Young had a significant drinking issue on the first day off filming the scene in the detention cell, he began to shake Brooks. Believing he wasted green bile gushed from his mouth, he was sent to the hospital immediately. Afterwards, Brooks stated, "If you want and cast an alcoholic." Young later sued, but he never returned. According to Warner Brothers, the movie had lost its Waco Kid once more, at which point Gene Wilder stepped in. Brooks, who hadn't given him any thought, for the Waco Kid, whom he believed to be, he had offered Wilder that he was too young and fresh, the antagonistic part earlier, but Wilder stated no. Brooks phoned him out of desperation, crying. Wilder had just gotten off of work. He got on a show with Brooks on the producer's plane and took a direct flight to Los Angeles when he put the outfit on, and it fit like a glove. He was already on set that Monday. Unusual timing and subtle charm turned it, Waco Kid, into something gun for Plasteel, well as his rapport with Cleon Little Beckham, the film's most important element. Last-minute casting's ability to prevent turmoil. Everything Blazing was originally screened by Mel Brooks. For Warner's top brass, the room was a catastrophe. Brothers. Not a single executive smiled in silence. There were several fart jokes in the movie. The incident of the horse punching and the usage of the N-word without reluctance. There was discomfort rather than laughter. Then, indignation. Leo Greenfield, the head of the studio domestic distribution, said unequivocally that they ought to put the movie away and take the others. Said they didn't have a financial hit. "I simply don't like the film they desired." Brooks was given a lengthy list of the campfire scene is edited out and deleted. The violence gets rid of the insults. Brooks courteously listened, took the list, and departed therein before squishing it into a ball, and discarded it. He wasn't making any changes. Brooks knew he just had one chance. He set up a second screening right away. For the workers, not the suits, the postal room janitors and Secretary Esmels, and the room burst this time. People were giggling from the very beginning. Uncontrollably, they were having trouble breathing. Some people are even toppling over their chairs. Was in the finest sense complete anarchy. Norman Steinberg was a co-author, he said, remembering the moment clearly. Individuals were actually rolling on Thefler, and Brooks, observing everything as it happened, expressed his true feelings. And this ISA movie that evening at the studio, executives noticed something they were unable to disregard. The actual viewers and ordinary people loved it, which is what kept the film afloat from being buried despite that crass response. The studio remained anxious. They did not wish to take a chance on a national release. Therefore they were cautious. Only 3 cities would see the opening of Saddles: Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. There are no critic previews or advertisements. Buzz just to see what's released. Cold occurred that these cities were selected. Thus, they had a higher chance of receiving themisment, particularly the Jewish Catskills type comedy, in which Brooks was an expert. The studio had hoped for low figures, perhaps enough to keep their face intact. Instead, there were crowded theaters yelling while giggling and saying "moo" that, like wildfire, disseminated. The gamble had gone wrong, and the fire was only. Critics were unsure of what to do when they first started. Some people loved it, while others didn't, deemed it offensive and vulgar, but none if that mattered. Viewers continued to show. By spring 1974, the movie was playing in both small towns and cities. The studio's suburban venues had suddenly. The anticipated stillness was selling. Not everyone watched Blazing. They argued, disputed, and quoted Saddles lines that encircled the block over it. What had begun as a niche comedy had evolved into even the worst national sensation. Reviews have to acknowledge that the audience was. The film had shattered through the wailing. Every obstacle and completed it using scenes without one idea would that ever transcend these answers, followed by the payment. $2.6 million was the budget. Yet the total gross in North America of $119.6 million, making it the top movie. In 197,463 million people are thought to have seen it in theaters, which surpasses any Lord of decades later. The Rings movie was released, Blazing Saddles, with inflation adjustments, around $600 million. But it wasn't merely a success, was a phenomenon. Mel Brooks had disregarded his instincts, the CEOs, and created just he made the movie he wanted to. The movie was rewritten, not just survived. The guidelines for what constitutes comedy, even Blazing Saddles' minute details, were interwoven with significance. Take the name of the governor, William J. Leatermonth. That sounds absurd. It's indeed a reference to a genuine French Joseph Poul, a performer, was born in 1857. Peugeot, also known as El Toman, was a worldwide celebrity. This indicates that the fart maniac, who wasn't merely a stage moniker, it was his performance, might breathe water or air into his rectum and release it. Whenever you're ready, he played melodies that blew out in rhythm. Candles created impressions that he was even able to poof on a cigarette with only his rear end because Poel was so well liked. Nurses had to be assigned to his performances to perform those who passed out from laughter as well. Difficult after someone is said to have died. He laughed and made more money than their most well-known actress in France when the governor was named for. Brooks was a compliment rather than merely a joke, was a legendary figure in body humor who had formerly controlled Brooks in the Moulin Rouge. Didn't only play, he did more. He also played a native role as the governor, an American chief with fluency in Yiddish. One of the most ridiculous scenes in the movie are scenarios when a black van is let by the chief after passing unscathed. Settlers crack the joke that makes every Hollywood Western in Yiddish. He says, cliché upside down, be calm and don't let him go for as long as you're in good health. They're darker than us. It was disrespectful and ridiculous, and in the past, it was intentional. Jewish people frequently played native roles. Brooks, an actor, changed the script and created a joke that was so complex that only humans knowledgeable about Jewish culture and the history of Hollywood casting would really use. Brooks' acting career didn't end there. He either incorporated his voice into situations or you wouldn't believe the vocalist's support. He is the random Lily Von Top. Heckler in The Last Battle. As well as him, he added minor notes to the soundtrack. Versions of himself concealed in plain sight saturation made it humorous. There are jokes in every frame, sound designed to be as ridiculous as possible, and if anything violated the guidelines of he even leaned into the storytelling harder, and nothing better demonstrates that. Compared to the film's intentional usage of anachronisms occur in the Old Testament West. But all of a sudden, Count Basie and Orchestra performs in Paris in April. A cowboy mentions a tune from the 1930s, a sports TV program that was not yet in existence. The fourth wall is broken in the last fight, completely colliding with a Hollywood noise stage, followed by a musical. And finally, a cafeteria. It's a statement, not an error. Brooks wished to inform you that this was a comedy in a Western costume. Western broke the genre of time and space. Rationality, and because of that, the crowd adored it. Then there appears to be a moment that'dly impossible. In roughly 20 minutes while watching the film in the midst of a dusty 1874 desert setting with his entire jazz ensemble, Count Basie emerge out of nowhere wearing sharp in Paris. Tuxedos are playing April as if it were not the Wild West, but a concert hall. The odd thing is that jazz didn't even exist in 1874, not even close to the previous ragtime. It would be another 20 years before jazz appeared. Years. But they are still performing on the open desert, as if it were that the scene is the most typical thing in the world. It is startlingly funny and utterly bizarre location. And that's the director's main purpose. Mel Brooks had no intention of being to history. He aimed to shock the audience and disregard the guidelines. Wasn't merely a brief musical joke. It lasted for a few minutes and completely drifted the Western plot, but rather than detracting from the atmosphere, it somehow improved the situation and turned it into one of the movie's most memorable moments, illustrating Brooks' fondness for ridiculous humor and his propensity to switch movies. Bass's song, Customs Turned Upside Down. It wasn't just any rendition that was played. Was his renowned 1955 configuration of Paris in April. That version included a fluid swing and bold brass with the traditional piano beat of Basie, initially noted in 1955, and it turned become one of his distinctive elements in live performances. As one of the most well-known performances took place during the Newport Jazz Festival in 1956, which is still regarded as a pivotal point, and by utilizing that precise rendition, jazz history, Brooks provided a further level of significance. But didn't want a haphazard jazz song. He selected something with a lot of history. It was honoring Basie's memory and providing a means of combine the history of actual music with comedy, which further enhanced the scenario. It was bizarre that Basie didn't do a persona. He performed a genuine jazz legend, simply appeared in the midst of a funny Western from the 19th century. That option made things seem even stranger. An amazing Basie's serene and cool attitude contrasted with the untamed atmosphere that makes the comedy hit even. Instead of appearing perplexed, he looked at us as if he somehow belonged there. Made everything funnier because you don't often see a world-renowned musicians participate in a sight, particularly without attempting to take center stage. However, that was the charm that Brooks offered. Combining reality, dream, and Basie leaning directly into it. This wasn't only insanity at random. Brooks was crying. Dissecting the classic Western film rules, particularly the earlier ones. 1974 were dusty towns filled with serious men, and rarely did they enjoy the dramatic gunfights. Despite the format, Brooks showed little concern regarding adhering to tradition. He desired to the jazz scene was his, therefore he broke it. Loudest, most obvious method of doing that. Some researchers even thought that setting a black jazz ensemble in a customary Western setting with a lot of white genres was a daring declaration that went against the grain of and made viewers aware of culture doesn't adhere to precise timelines, changes, overlaps, and occasionally crashes in the most amusing ways possible. Another mystery is concealed in Blazing Saddles that the majority of people completely overlooked. The Oscar-winning actress Anne Braftoft and Mel Brooks' wife made an appearance in the film. However, no one observed, even though it was one of just 24 performers to ever receive an Oscar, Emmy, and she gave Tony a rare triple crown without asking. In order to get any notice, she discreetly joined as an extra in the chapel scene. Noonie close-up without acknowledgement or larger disclose that she simply blended in. It wasn't it was either an inside joke or a publicity stunt. Merely giving the project woman a silent nod. The spouse had devoted himself to the cameo, turned into a sweet little Easter egg, one that is rarely caught, even by fans, and it demonstrated the jovial yet devoted relationship. Brooks and Braftoft, who were 41 years of marriage. But despite everything, the evidence that something odd occurred, IMDb and other major movie websites declined to enumerate Braftoft's contribution to the film. Fan historians who contributed screenshots verified it, even though Brooks brought it up. Still wouldn't update the databases. Record. No formal acknowledgement. This little oversight became a small-scale mystery. People among moviegoers continued to attempt to fix it, but nothing changed. Blamed stringent regulations regarding uncredited roles that some believed the cameo was small, yet the omission is significant to many admirers, become a component of the narrative itself. Demonstrated how even the most well-known actors can be removed from the document if they actually decide to enter the room in silence. Not all behind the scenes information. Blazing Saddles' tale is a quiet one. However, the audition of Melanie Kahn for the part of Lily Von Stupp began with complete wildest when Mel Brooks requested to view. Her legs froze. Believing it to Beatty, nice lady at one of those auditions, instructed to leave. Therefore it's that she snapped Brooks in what amounted to an audition. In a panic, he rapidly described himself, required to ascertain whether she could execute a Maline's dramatic chair straddle Dietrich performed on Dusty Rides once more. That was that just research. Kahn, with no sleeves, instantly understanding. She snatched up a chair. One by lifting her skirt and striking the perfect stance. The part immediately, her charisma, her guts. And that solitary agreement was sealed by funny timing. Resulted to a nomination for an Oscar and made her a major star in the movie. However, she didn't stop there. Immediately after she looked Brooks dead in the audition, the eye said, lifting her skirt once more. The statement, "no touching," wasn't pre-written, it just appeared and wasn't intended. That short line turned out to be ideal. Not only was it humorous, but it was legendary on set, established the character's overall tone. Kahn wasn't merely making fun of, was the joke, the line between Thiel at once. Brooks remarked in a subsequent punchline that one instance persuaded him that Lily was unique. No one else could play her. Self-assurance and timing for the required Joe band, that courageous soul ultimatella bombing, one of the most recognizably passacial in the history of comedy. When Mel Brooks got blazing in motion, even Saddles wasn't certain how far heckled go, which is how Richard Pryor appeared. Wasn't limited to the writing room in the past. He embodied the bravery of the movie at first. Mel Brooks was hesitant to use the N-word so frequently that he was anxious that audiences would leave. Studios closed it down completely before it did not recoil. He informed Brooks that if they intended to make fun of their racism, that to demonstrate that it wasn't actually softarious, the actual wording, instead of cleaning it up of hatred in order for the viewer to sense the sting. Pryor stated unequivocally, "We are recomposing a narrative on racial discrimination, that is the sole word, and that." And when Pryor was unable to star, he didn't storm off in the movie. Assisted in deciding who should be in charge. He said, "Little chose Cleon. Was dark coal and would frighten the seat. The purpose was to get the tea out of that town. The town was meant to be frightened of fear, is what made a black sheriff." The smoothness of the satirical Sting clone, self-assured performance made the entire even more absurd setup. And that's why it succeeded. Without Pryor's encouragement, Will May would never have been cast. There would be a difference between Blazing Saddles and, however, there was more drama behind Pryor. Situations in which the original actor played Gig Young won an Oscar for being the Waco Kid. On the first day of filming, the winner was intended to hang inverted in irons instead of using a jail cell for a scene. He began incontrovertibly throwing up. Years of drinking had finally caught up with him. Its removal had a negative impact on productivity. Halted, frigid Brooks had to take quick action. Gene Wilder was hired after Young was sacked, who traveled across the nation to accept the role. Young didn't go unpunished. He filed a lawsuit, Warner Brothers, for violating the terms of the contract. He claimed that the dismissal wasn't justified, increased the already chaotic legal situation. Production. But the most sinister turn of events, Gig Young killed his wife later. In 1978. Then his own fleeting moment of disaster in Blazing Saddles turned into an unsettling tune in the history of Hollywood. And then the lawsuit was something that no one anticipated. From the antagonist of the movie, Hedy Lamarr Headley, who was portrayed by Harvey Korman, Lamarr made a clear reference to the identity of the actress, and she wasn't impressed. She sued Warner Brothers and Brooks for $10 million, claiming that her name was used without authorization. The movie even made jokes regarding the lawsuit, saying, "This is 1874, you can file a lawsuit against her." But when Lamarr said it, she wasn't laughing. Was offensive and unapproved of. Brooks admired her and wished to avoid a lengthy. He instructed his attorneys to give her a fight, no matter how much she needed. It was never released to the public, although the case only became another illustration of how Blazing Saddles pulled to irritate people on every, perhaps even a retiring film. Legends nevertheless. None of it prevented the movie from in 2000. The American film made history. The Institute published its 100-year report. Saddles entered at the top of the laughing list. 6th. It outperformed Airplane, MASH, and just 5 movies out of dozens of other classic Shiger in the rankings, including Duck Soup, and in 2006. Annie Hall then worked at the library of it, was selected by Congress for the National Film the Registry, where cultural and films with historical significance are maintained indefinitely. It joined icons such as Fargo and Rocky, demonstrating that it wasn't simply ridiculous that the movie made fun of the Western genre, was ridiculed by racism, and had the courage to say things that no one else would. And it's still relevant today, actually. In the movie created a new controversy in 2024. A 3-minute trigger warning was introduced by HBO Max. Prior to the film, audiences had to sit via a message from a movie expert, Kellen Stewart, describing how to use stereotypes and racist epithets. She claimed that the movie made fun of them. Racism does not justify the move. Generated criticism, with some claiming they didn't need to be scolded. According to others, made it easier for younger audiences to comprehend what they were simply seeing. 2 movies on the Vice platform had scorching treatment. Gone with the Wind and Saddles, which stated everything pertaining to the film's heat, still carries. Mel Brooks anticipated this. During an interview in 2017, he stated, "Political comedy dies because of correctness." He said, "Was aware that Blazing Saddles couldn't be produced. Studios wouldn't touch it today. Audiences would go crazy." He said, "Cruel humor was acceptable, but he thought it was necessary for genuine comedy to take chances. Talk about the unimaginable." His caution extended beyond censorship. He created a film about art that fell into excruciating pain because he felt that hostility may be disarmed by laughing superior to all else.